Hi, this is Dr. Fry. Let's see if I can have this present. Let's see. Okay, this is Dr. Fry, and this is part two of the Chapter 20 Ecosystems and Biosphere. So the chapter outline was energy flow through ecosystems. That's where you do the food web and the 10% rule and the energy pyramid. The biogeochemical cycles, I told you we were going to focus on nitrogen and carbon, which is we're going to do carbon today. And then we did terrestrial and aquatic biomes. And this sort of should have been what your food web should have looked like that you in your activity, right? So the squirrel actually has two predators, so two things eat it. So the arrow should face towards the thing that is getting the energy. So he gets his energy, should be from nuts, but this one gets energy from grass. And then notice that everything feeds into the decomposers because everything poops, everything pees, and everything eventually dies, and it goes back to the decomposers, and the decomposers actually feed back into the producers because the plants take it up through the roots. So the idea is energy flows through the ecosystem, and nutrients actually cycle through the ecosystem. And this was the energy pyramid. All right, and so I did go over somewhat of these. I went over the nitrogen cycle, but we're going to do the carbon cycle today, and we're going to link that to climate change. So this is the carbon cycle that the book gives you. So why is carbon important? It has an atomic number of 6, which means it has 4 valence electrons, right? So it has 2 in its innermost shell and then 4 in its outermost shell, but it really wants 8 in its outermost shell. So it wants to actually have 4 more electrons, and it's going to do that by covalent bonding, right? So it can form 4 single covalent bonds, which would be methane, and this is what you frack for. If you have a gas stove, this is what you burn. It can have a double bond. This is carbon dioxide, so it's double covalently bonded to oxygen, but again, it has 4 covalent bonds. And it can have a triple bond. And this has a triple bond with, this is cyanide with nitrogen, but it does have a negative charge. So, but it can form single, double, and triple bonds. And right here is carbon right here. So this is carbon right here. Has atomic number of 6. So it can be found as gas. So this is carbon dioxide right here. And also this is carbon monoxide. So methane is also gas. And that's what this is showing you. So this is methane. So cows are notorious for producing lots of methane because they are ruminants. And if you burn a stove, you burn methane. Methane is also, they're talking about fracking now. They're talking about Joe Biden banning fracking. So fracking is really when you frack for methane. So you put a well in here and then you actually break the rock, but it has to be this certain type of shale. And then that actually gets taken up here and then it gets away. But it is gas, so it can get out. But it has been causing earthquakes and there's all these issues with it. But basically, this is methane, and then when they actually make a lot of plastic out of it, and then they break it down through this microbial process. They form these little pellets, and then they make single-use plastic, which is what we're going to kill ourselves with. So these are gases. So those were gases in our atmosphere. Most of it is nitrogen. 78% is nitrogen. Then oxygen. That makes up 99% of the gases in our atmosphere. Carbon only makes up 0.04%. So you might think, what's the big deal about carbon dioxide? But actually, our atmosphere is extremely sensitive to it because it's an important carbon a greenhouse gas. So here's carbon dioxide right here. So I did that already. Why did I put these in? Okay, so carbon can be found in all forms. It can be found also as a solid and a liquid, and it makes up organic compounds. So organic compounds have carbon and hydrogen. And generally, carbon is the backbone of organic compounds, and we'll talk about macromolecules a little bit. But there's a whole unit on macromolecules. I'm not going to cover it a lot here. But organic, so if you take organic chemistry in college, you are studying carbon and hydrogen. So if you're a biology major or a chemistry major or a pre-med major or a dental major, you'll probably have to take 2 semesters of organic chemistry when you go to college. I already did this. Why is this in here twice? Okay, so this is where, all right, so it can be found as liquids. So carbon, so you can have carbonated water. So basically anything that has bubbles in it, that is carbon dioxide. And we are famous for our limestone water, and it tastes good, and things like that. I'll show you that next. And also fossil fuels. So fossil fuels, so example, this is butane. So it has carbon and hydrogen in it, right? And butane is C4H10, as if you have a lighter, that's what you're burning. But also oil is liquid, and also the gasoline you put in your car is liquid. So carbon can be found in gas, and this is liquids. It can also be found in solids. So diamond is the purest form of carbon. So you can see it is purely carbon. And this is limestone. So limestone is calcium carbonate, and here's the carbon here, right here's the carbon here. And that's what our bedrock is made up of. So if you go out and pick up a rock outside, it's probably limestone. And then this is coal, which is also a solid, and this is full of carbon. So this is a carbon ring here. And so at each one of these little sections, there is a carbon molecule. So that's a carbon ring. So there's lots of carbon and hydrogen in coal. And actually, when you break that carbon-hydrogen bond, that's where you get the energy. So we are also made up of 18.5% carbon right here. So, but we are organic, we are carbon-based beings. So most of our molecules have a carbon backbone. And so these are the 4 actually categories of macromolecules. And again, we're going to have a unit on this, so I'm not going to cover this a lot here. But these are organic compounds, which means they all have carbon and hydrogen in it, right? So this is actually glucose, and it has 6 carbons. So this is the first carbon, second carbon, third carbon, fourth carbon, fifth carbon, sixth carbon. And then it also has hydrogens attached, right? So when you break this bond right here, it actually gives you energy. So if you eat sugar, you get energy because it has a lot of those carbon-hydrogen bonds. And so the 4 macromolecules are carbohydrates, which are short-term energy. So that would be like sugars and starches. Lipids are more long-term energy, and that's how we store our energy. So if you eat too much, you store your energy in the form of fat. Proteins are the workhorses of the cell, so they basically do everything in your cell and regulate your body. And nucleic acids are DNA and RNA, and they all have genetic material. So all 4 of these are organic compounds, and they're called macromolecules because they're big molecules. So this is the idea that, again, this is glucose, and this is a carbon ring. And if you put a bunch of carbon rings together, you will get a starch, right? So these could be long chains. This is glycogen. This one actually has some branches off of it, but this is what your liver breaks down to make ATP. And this is what plants break down to make ATP. So actually, this gets broken down to a glucose, which these are all glucoses. And then that glucose gets fed into the mitochondria to make ATP. This is cellulose, and this cellulose is actually plant cell walls. And if you eat a high fiber diet, you're eating a lot of cellulose. So high fiber diets are supposed to be healthy for you. Again, so this is sugar. So sugar, this is glucose. So glucose can be in a ring, or it can actually be in a straight line. This is cellulose. So again, you can see these are all carbon. So it has lots of carbon and hydrogen in it. But celery is cellulose, cellulose. So there's a lot of cellulose in celery. Um, so can also, this is carbohydrates and starch, right? So if you eat potatoes are high in starch, breads are high in starch. Carbon, basically wood is made up of hydrogen carbon, which kind of makes it combustible. So people burn wood, but it is recalcitrant, right? So it actually doesn't break down very easily, as easily as the others. It's good for structure and support, like you build houses out of it. It's low in nutrients, and basically when it goes into the soil and decomposes, it really becomes a major part of organic matter. And organic matter is important because that's where the bacteria and all the good stuff actually lives. The second one is lipids. So lipids is how you store long-term energy. Cholesterol is considered a lipid. So if you have high cholesterol, they want to put you on medicine. But it's also structural in the phospholipid bilayer, and this is what cell membranes are made up of. This is just a single layer, but this is the phosphate head, and then these are the lipid tails, right? And this one is saturated because it's saturated with hydrogen, it's straight. And this one is unsaturated because it has bent. So generally animal fats are saturated and plant fats, animal fats would be like butter and milk and animal fat, lard, bacon. These, you're not supposed to eat a lot of these. You're supposed to eat more of these. This would be olive oil, corn oil, vegetable oil, coconut oil, things like that. So these are considered more healthy. And this is the bilayer here, right? So the fats actually line up on the inside and then the head's low on the outside. And then the third one is proteins. And here is this alpha carbon. And then here's the carboxyl group, which is right here. And so this is the amino acid that makes up proteins. And this is the variant group, right? This is the R group. And there's actually 20 different R groups. So there's really only 20 different amino acids. And that's them here. And this is just showing you the R group, right? This is the R group. So, and the last one is DNA and RNA, which are nucleic acids. So DNA is double-stranded, RNA is single-stranded. So COVID is actually a RNA virus. So COVID actually has RNA, and then it comes in and it hijacks your ribosomes and it makes its own proteins, and that's how it reproduces. But the DNA actually stays in the nucleus. It never comes out of the nucleus. And RNA is the cheap copy, and that's what copies. The RNA will go into the nucleus, copy the DNA, and then come out, and then it'll hook up to a ribosome, and it'll make amino acids. So, and this one has 4 bases, and this one has 4 bases. I'm not going to go into it a lot here. All right, so if we were in class, we would make a carbon cycle poster, but I'm actually going to have you do something different. I'm going to have you do that understanding global change with the modeling. I'm going to have you model this poster. But they're basically 4 spheres to the carbon cycle. So biosphere is the living part. So it'd be plants, animals, bacteria, things like that. Lithosphere is parts of the planet that contain rocks and sediment. And I think that HHMI calls it a geosphere. Hydrosphere is part of the planet with water, and atmosphere is part of the planet with vapor and gases. And so those are the 4 spheres there. And we would make this poster in class if we were in class. So those are the reservoirs. And then you also have carbon flows. And the flow would be photosynthesis, respiration, diffusion, burial and sedimentation, weathering and erosion. And I can't read the bottom. And eruption of gases. And that's these. So basically the idea is photosynthesis takes CO2 from the atmosphere, and photosynthesis takes CO2 and water, and it makes sugar. And the sugar then gets fixed into the plant, which is the biosphere. And then we breathe out. We are in the biosphere. So we breathe out carbon dioxide. When you breathe out, that's respiration. When we breathe out CO2, and that goes back to the atmosphere. That's the idea. So these are flows. So this is the idea, is that algae, which lives in the biosphere, green algae, does photosynthesis. So it takes its CO2 from the water, because it lives in the water, and it's going to make sugar, and it's going to fix that into the biosphere. And then when the algae dies, it's going to release that CO2 back into the water. That's the idea. Okay, so you can have, so the smallest reservoir is CO2, is atmosphere, and there's only 0.04% of our atmosphere is carbon dioxide. And the biggest reservoir is the oceans, and particularly the deep oceans. So they store an incredible amount of carbon, but there is a limit to what they can store, and we're reaching that point, or we've already reached it. And then the flows can be short time scales, like photosynthesis, or respiration, or diffusion. The long-term scales could be weathering and erosion. So weathering is the idea that big rocks break down into smaller rocks, and smaller rocks break down into smaller rocks, but that takes a long time. So it can be freezing and weathering, or all kinds of different things that can cause things to weather. But that's weathering, so that's over a longer time period. And erosion is when it gets sort of washed away in the water. And this can be faster depending on the circumstances, human caused circumstances. And then burial and sedimentation is a long process, and this is how you get fossil fuels. So basically, fossil fuels, you can watch this video right here, and this is actually how you make calcium carbonate. And I'll actually show you those two. I'm not going to show the videos, but I'm going to show you. So basically, limestone is calcium carbonate, and limestone is made out of dead plants and animals. So our state fossil is a brachiopod, which is made out of a shell. So basically, the algae does photosynthesis, and then that goes through the food chain. But anything that has a shell is made out of calcium carbonate, like seashells, brachiopods, snails, crabs, lobsters, shrimp. All of their things are made out of calcium carbonate. And eventually they die, and then they go to the ocean floor, and then they get smashed and smashed and smashed until they become sedimentary rock. And that's what limestone is. Limestone is actually made out of dead plants and animals. So without photosynthesis, we actually wouldn't have limestone, because, so that's limestone. And that is this burial and sedimentation. So the other thing you could say with burial and sedimentation is fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are made out of dead plants, basically. So coal is basically made out of wood. So the coal in Kentucky was formed during the Carboniferous, and at that time, Kentucky was right around the equator. It was warm, it was wet, and those trees actually became coal. And you generally find coal on land, and you generally find oil around water, because oil is basically made out of algae. So basically, fossil fuels come from plants and somewhat animals, but mainly plants. So limestone is basically made through burial and sedimentation, and fossil fuels are basically made through burial and sedimentation. And you can watch these two videos. This one's actually pretty good right here. Okay, so that's the carbon cycle. And I'll just show you, this is limestone in Kentucky, and most of Kentucky is actually limestone, but this is Ordovic and limestone, and Lexington is right in the middle of it. This is the oldest bedrock in Kentucky. And so basically those dry fences you see, they are made out of limestone water. I mean, limestone water is actually good for making whiskey. So if you ever go to a bourbon distillery, there's usually a limestone creek flowing right beside it. And that's where they traditionally got their water. They don't get their water there anymore. because we polluted it. But this is also a karst landscape, which means it produces underground caves because it actually dissolves in water. So Mammoth Cave is the idea of that. The limestone gets washed away, and what's left here is sandstone. Sandstone does not dissolve. And I think not that long ago there was the Corvette Museum had a big sinkhole, right? And some of the cars fell in the sinkhole. Anyways, but that's all limestone. So the limestone is made up of dead shells, basically, and algae. All right, I don't know why I put that there. All right, so the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere can move quickly into and out of the oceans, and that is diffusion. And so once it's in the ocean, it can no longer trap heat, which is a good thing for us, because we want actually the carbon to go into the ocean. So the more CO2 that is in the atmosphere, the more diffuses into the ocean. But the oceans can only hold so much CO2, and I'll show you some problems with that. All right, so if I ask you what two pathways take carbon out of the atmosphere, so you have to look at these arrows. So one arrow would be photosynthesis. It fixes it into the biosphere. You want it out of the atmosphere. And the other way is diffusion. And that's the higher CO2 is in the atmosphere, the more diffuses into the hydrosphere, into the ocean. So what form of carbon diffuses in and out of the ocean? This would be carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide diffuses in and out of the ocean. Okay, so it says what process fixes organic carbon into the biosphere? That is photosynthesis. So, and what organic molecule is fixed? This would be sugar or glucose, because that's the product of photosynthesis. And then that gets fixed into the plant, and then something eats the plant, or you eat the plant, or you eat something that ate the plant. So this is how carbon moves through the food web right here. It starts with photosynthesis, or the producers. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about photosynthesis here. So photosynthesis takes CO2 from the atmosphere and water, which actually has to come up through the roots, and it needs light, and it happens in the chloroplast, and it makes this molecule sugar. This is glucose right here, and it is organic because it has carbon and hydrogen in it. And then this is a byproduct that it actually doesn't need. So if you look at it, really all it's doing is moving the carbon from here over to here, right? So it's a single replacement or double replacement. So I can't remember anyways. So, but basically what it is doing, it is moving, it's moving the hydrogens from the water over to this molecule right here, right? That's basically what it's doing. So it's just moving hydrogen molecules, but it does it in 2 steps. And it happens in the chloroplast, right? And you can see, this is the chloroplast in the cell, and you can see these pretty easily. And then this is the chloroplast, and it has these thylakoids. We're going to do we'll do a whole unit on that. So basically, water is going to leave the cell through the stomata, and oxygen is going to leave the cell through stomata, but it takes up CO2. So these stomata have to be open in order for the plant to do photosynthesis, because that's its only source of carbon dioxide. And it needs water, right? So it needs water, and it needs CO2, and it needs light. So you might ask, why is the water leaving the cell? So I'll show you that in a minute. And actually, water is leaving the cell because the plant has to take water up through the roots. So it has to take it up through the roots. And if you think about a big tree, it has to pull that water all the way up through here and out to the leaf, right? And it does that through water potential, but it does pull the water up. So it comes up and it pulls it up, and then it goes out the leaf. And this is the stomata here. So you can think about it as a big straw. So when the stomata are open, it's like a big straw. You're just sucking water up through this whole system, and then it goes out into the atmosphere. When you close the stomata, all that stops. So the water stops going up, and it's like a pump that you turn off. And so when you turn it off, the plant cannot do any more photosynthesis when it runs out of water, because it needs water to do photosynthesis. So that's why water there, it showed water actually leaving the cell because it has to be drawn up through the whole plant and then it goes out the stomata. And actually, wood is xylem, and it's made of lignin and cellulose, right? So that's what wood's made of. But xylem actually transports the water, and wood is basically xylem. If you look real closely, wood is just a series of small straws, which that's what it's showing you right here. So this is a sort of the longitudinal section of wood. So you can see there's just a series of really small straws. So that's how they take up CO2, right? So their stomata have to be open in order for them to do photosynthesis. So when the stomata is open, they can take in CO2 and they can pull up water. And then that photosynthesis actually happens in the chloroplast. And these are stomata, and we would look at stomata if we were in class. So they're generally on the underside of leaf. And so this is when they're basically two guard cells, and this one is open and this one is closed. So they can open and close them. So when there's plenty of water, they open them, and when it gets dry, they will close them. So these are two open stomata. This is one that's open, and this is one that's closed. So that's how they're important for photosynthesis. Okay. So I'll skip over that. And I'll skip over this one. But this is transpiration. So the water gets drawn up through the roots, it goes out here, and then it will leave the stomata if they're open. And if they're open, the plant can do photosynthesis. If they're not open, the plant can't do photosynthesis. And that's what that's showing you again. I don't know why I have all these in here. Okay, so basically what you're going to do for homework is you will model this flow chart here in the HHMI Understanding Climate Change Interactive. And I will show you mine in class on Tuesday. So I'll make sure you come on Tuesday and I'll show you how to do that. If you can't figure it out, you might be able to figure it out. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is climate change. So what is climate change, the effects of climate change, and solutions to climate change? And I haven't really decided how I'm going to do this. If we were in class, I'd have you do presentations, but I'm not sure. So what is climate change? So climate change is the idea that the climate is changing. And so what is the evidence of that? Our temperatures are going up. So this is since 1960 to 2010. And the reason why this is going up and down there, so that is seasonal. This is actually taken in Hawaii. This is an observatory on the top of that mountain in Hawaii. And so this is seasonal because of the temperate deciduous forest, right? So during the summer, there's a lot of photosynthesis goes on, and they take in CO2. That would be in the summer. And then in the winter, they don't do photosynthesis, and then there's a lot more CO2 in the atmosphere. But that fluctuates. This is seasonal. But the black line is actually the average. And this is actually heat. So as, this is CO2. So this is CO2. So this is CO2. And as the CO2 goes up, also the heat goes up. So these two are correlated. As CO2 goes up, more energy is trapped and the temperature goes up. And these are just some more examples of this. So this has been documented several times. So this is this is at meteorological stations. And this one is from NOAA. But again, it's showing that CO2 levels are going up and the temperature is going up. Skip over that. All right. So, so what is the difference between global warming and climate change? So global warming is just the increase of Earth's average temperature due to buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So most people, we call it climate change now. Everybody used to call it global warming, but now climate change has sort of been adopted. So it is the long-term changes in climate, including average temperature and precipitation. It recognizes that although the average surface temperature may increase, the regional or local temperature may decrease or remain the same. So that global warming is the idea that the Earth is heating up. Climate change is the idea that the Earth is not heating up evenly. And that's sort of shown here. So if it's dark red, it's going to get warm by 2 degrees, and that's mainly at the poles because the polar ice sheets are melting. And then the blue is if it's going to get cooler. So you can see it's actually going to get cooler sort of around the equator and in the oceans. And actually Kentucky is the Ohio Valley is expected to get wetter. So it's going to get warmer, but it's also going to get wetter. But they feel like we're going to have more intense storms as we get wetter. So anyway, so the idea of climate change is not everything is getting warmer. Actually, the oceans are getting cooler, and it's most affected in the poles because those ice sheets are melting. All right, so we'll talk about the greenhouse effects. So the Earth is surrounded by a thin layer of gases, and you can see it's very thin. So you can see this is a thin layer here. So the atmosphere is very thin for the Earth, but it is important. So the greenhouse effect is the idea we get heat and light from the sun, and it comes and hits the Earth, and it bounces off. But our atmosphere actually traps some of that heat, and that's actually it's like a warm blanket we have, right? So that provides a warm blanket that actually keeps the warm, it sort of moderates the Earth's temperature. So that's the idea. That's the greenhouse effect. So if you're in a greenhouse with glass, right, the light and the heat comes through, but it gets trapped inside there, right? So on a hot day, the greenhouse gets really hot. And so what is trapping the heat though? And what is really, so here's the light coming in and then it gets reflected back. What is trapping the heat is CO2, water, and methane. So everybody is focusing now on CO2 because that's the easiest thing for us to regulate. And water and methane is also an issue. But most people talk about CO2, which is, but this is carbon based and this is carbon based, right? So we're doing the carbon cycle. And so basically you could say that this is so it goes Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, right? So this is closer to the sun and this is further away from the sun. So this is a very thin atmosphere, right? So this has a thicker atmosphere and this is a very thick atmosphere. So almost all the CO2 is in the ground. So there's very little CO2 in the atmosphere and they're very cold, right? So it's very cold there. Negative 50 degrees Celsius is very cold. Here, Venus, which is closer to the sun, the atmosphere contains 96% CO2. So there's lots of CO2 in the atmosphere here, hardly any there. And here it's extremely hot. So we could not live here because it's too hot. We could not live here because it's too cold. But here we have 0.04% CO2 in the atmosphere. The average temperature is 15 degrees. So this is a livable atmosphere for us. So most people say like we live in the Goldilocks zone. But it is very sensitive to CO2. So this is to the point that, you know, the temperature of the planet is highly dependent on the atmosphere and how many global warming gases are in the atmosphere. All right, so has climate change happened before? And this is where that HHMI Paleochem History of Change comes in. And the answer is yes, it's happened many times before. And so basically this is carbon dioxide. And as carbon dioxide goes up, the Earth gets warmer. And then as it goes down, it gets cooler. And then it goes up, it gets warmer and down. So basically down here at the bottom, these are all ice ages right here. So these are all ice ages, and this is current. And then between two ice ages, you have to have global warming. And this is over 800,000 years. So that's 800,000 years ago. This is present, right? This is present. This is 100,000 years ago. And this is actually millions of years. So these are just the bigger ice ages. So here we've had some really big ice ages. And then here, this is global warming. This is global warming. This is global warming. This one here was when the woolly mammoths and stuff. So anyways, okay. So again, this is just showing you different cycles. This is at 400,000 years. So it depends on what time scale you're looking at of, you know, how many they show. So this is an ice age. This is global warming. This is ice age. This is global warming. So it is a regular pattern that the Earth actually goes through. Okay, so I did all that. I can't remember what I was going to do here. All right, we'll talk about evidence of climate change here. So the evidence is atmospheric CO2 levels are rising, global temperatures are rising, our oceans are getting warmer, our ice sheets are shrinking, and the glaciers are melting. So these are alpine glaciers, so they're mountain glaciers. So like in the United States, most of our glaciers are in the Rockies. So people go skiing in the winter, right, in the Rockies. So so ice is so this is ice loss in red, right? So this is ice loss. And snow cover is declining, so we're having less and less snow. And sea levels are rising. So as the snow melts, it basically runs into the river. That's the water cycle. And our sea levels are rising, which is a problem because, lots of people live near the ocean. New York City, um, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, lots and lots of cities live right on the shore. And we also have declining Arctic ice, so that's the poles, and that's important because they are sort of the Earth's cooling the refrigerator, right? So it keeps the Earth cool, and when those things melt, the Earth is going to get hotter a lot faster. And the poles are actually most affected by climate change. I showed in that one chart. There's also increasing extreme events, which is pretty pronounced this year. So we've had more hurricanes, and the wildfires out west have been notoriously bad, which is partly human caused. But the idea that it's drier, and so there's more chance for wildfires to happen because everything's dry. So a warmer atmosphere actually produces stronger storms, and our hurricanes have been stronger. Another one is ocean acidification, and this is really going to affect a lot of the sea life. And like I said, so all those shells are made out of calcium carbonate, and ocean acidification is going to break down those shells. So this is CO2. This is atmospheric CO2. Atmospheric CO2 is going up, and seawater CO2. This is the pH of CO2, or the amount of CO2, percentage of CO2. And so that is also going up, which makes this pH actually go down. And if you think about it, if you're acid, your pH is 1 to 7. And if you're basic, your pH is 7 to 14. So the idea that the pH is going down, which means it's getting more acidic. So this is showing more acidity. And I have a really good video for that, but I don't know where that is, but okay. Okay. So sea levels are going to rise. This is not directly in order, but okay. So here the glaciers are melting. So this is 1914. This is 2004. Global sea levels are rising. Oh my God, I don't know why these are doubled. Okay, so these are this is an important source of the alpine glaciers, which are mountain glaciers, is an important source of drinking water. So basically, this is the Colorado River, which starts in the Rocky Mountains. So in the spring, that ice starts melting, and that's what feeds the river. And so basically, this is really the only river in this area. This is not a very big river. It's not as big as the Ohio River, even. It's a small river, but it goes through the Grand Canyon. It actually carved out the Grand Canyon. So there's lots of dams on this now. Here's the Hoover Dam, which is right by Las Vegas. Here's the Glen Canyon Dam. This was a controversial dam. Anyways, so but you can say there's other dams on this river. So here's lots of dams. And in dry years, actually, this doesn't ever reach the Gulf of Mexico. This river actually dries out. But the idea is if you lose all the alpine ice, what is going to feed this river? And that's the issue. So in the Andes, it's the same issue. You know, they have glaciers, any tall mountains that have glaciers, that's really provides the rivers with their water. And this is ocean acidification. So basically, the CO2 will dissolve into the water, which I showed on that video, and then it's going to combine with water to make a carbonic acid. So this acid is going to try to, so basically the shells need a bicarbonate ions, which sort of can go, it's if you understand the chemistry, I'm not going to go into the chemistry here. But basically, these shells need bicarbonate ions right here, and that's how they make their shells. So they're basically calcium carbonate. But this is actually taking that away from them. So, and because of these hydrogen ions, and that's why it's becoming more acidic. So this is actually robbing them of the bicarbonate atoms. It's actually skipping this step and going here, where the shells actually need this to make their shells. Anyways. Okay, so that's what this is showing. So this plus this makes bicarbonate, and this is what they actually need to make their shells. And if this doesn't form, then they can't make their shells. Yeah, so it says carbonic acid, which is this, steals the carbonate, which is this, needed to make some marine organisms for their shells. And the shells I'm talking about is like the corals, the seashells, the shrimp, the lobster, the crabs. All the corals are made out of calcium carbonate. So that's where they get this carbonate thing to make their shells. There's stronger oceans and storms. So there's lots more stronger oceans. I thought I got some of this out of here. So we'll talk about effects on the biosphere. This is adaptation versus extinction. We're currently in the fifth biggest extinction event. So there's lots of range shifts. So species are moving further north because it's getting warmer, and species are moving to higher latitudes because it's getting warmer. And this includes invasive species. So climate change is basically going to affect a lot of plants and animals, and particularly things that migrate. It's affecting migration patterns. So all of these animals in black are affected. So ecosystems can be affected by temperature, increase or decrease of rainfall, pH. So acid rain is a big one here. That's based from burning fossil fuels. Longer growing seasons, so that changes migrations and things like that. Salinity, saltiness, activities and distribution of other species. So you can see here that there's range shifts, right? So here in 1990, Kentucky is basically green. And you can see in 2006, Kentucky is basically almost all yellow. So that means we are having a longer growing season. So we're going to be able to grow plants that we weren't be able to grow in 1990 that could grow down here. And now we can grow them here. That's the idea. But the idea is that polar bears, they're already at the north, though, so they don't have anywhere to migrate. And so they're basically out of luck. So their invasive species are going to invade. I'm going to skip over that. I will do this. So it says some seasonal biological activities are happening 15 to 20 days earlier than 7 years ago. So trees are blooming earlier, migrating birds arriving earlier, and butterflies are emerging earlier. And so if the butterflies get here before the milkweed is out, then the monarchs are out of luck. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but but that's the idea. So when you have these symbiotic relationships, these mutualisms between two different species, and both species aren't there at the right time, then that's going to affect those ecological interactions. That's the idea. Okay, so this is showing you here. So European pied flycatcher chicks are now born later than the caterpillars they eat. So the idea is that their food supply isn't here, then they're out of luck. So the effects of the lithosphere. So this is thawing. So right, so the poles are getting hotter. This is what this is showing, and the ice is melting. And there's also thawing of permafrost. So permafrost is basically tundra, but it's frozen, right? And so the ground is frozen. That's permafrost, and this is actually it's showing you that it's thawing. And when it thaws, it actually produces an incredible amount of methane. And so this actually is going to make things warm even more. But the permafrost is thawing, and because of that, houses are sinking. They're losing ocean line. I think they've had to move like villages and stuff back a couple miles because it was actually falling into the ocean. So when this permafrost thaws, there's water in it. The ice becomes water and it washes into the ocean. Yeah, so basically it destabilizes the soil erosion increases, it increases methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and there's also loss of shoreline. There's severe droughts, which farmers are generally worried about. And 100-year floods are happening more often. And the wildfires were on the news for a lot this year. So the California wildfires and out west wildfires are getting worse and worse. And this is actually showing you a pinyon pine. And because of drought, it is actually looks like it's moving more towards chaparral. So chaparral is drier. But this is pinyon pine. This is a gymnosperm. This would be taiga. And now it's moving actually into chaparral, which is drier. And this is actually set up to burn. This is set up to burn too, but not as fast as this. So anyway, so that's the idea. So this is just in 2 years. And I think that's it. So I'll be honest, I'm still trying to figure out how to teach this because I have it set up to teach in classroom. So we're going to spend one more week on this, and I think I'm going to have you watch a couple movies. I'm not really sure. I haven't decided yet. But this is the end of part 2, and hope that is helpful.